Hello, Sarah.
Hi, Lisa.
And hello, everyone who is hopefully joining us right now. I am Lisa Septimus. I'm the Yoetzet Halacha of the 5 towns. I'm also a teacher at North Shore Hebrew Academy High School and a Rebbitzin, Young Israel in North Woodmere. And I would like Sarah to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Dr. Sarah Roer, also Bendheim, and I'm here tonight with Lisa Septimus. I'm in private practice in New York City, and I have a specialty in eating disorders, and I do a lot of parenting work and teenage work, and I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with Lisa and with all of you tonight.
Absolutely.
I feel like we're kind of cleaning up the tail end, Lisa, because I know we're at the end of everybody's night. So hopefully we're going to keep everybody a little invigorated.
We are, but come on, guys. Like, what are people really doing at this time of night?
Exactly.
Just scrolling through social media. So here we are. Exactly. We're going to talk about that. And Sarah and I were talking about this has been with COVID. I think it's a year of more scrolling, more social media, and we wanted to hear about. Did we consume it differently? Did it affect us differently?
How? And I think one of the things Lisa and I were talking about that we were thinking a lot about is the balancing act between trying to merge COVID and real life. Like, I was listening to some of the talks today, and so many things are really taking a moment to pause and reflect on the intensity and depth of the COVID experience in the past year and the ways in which it changed our life. But social media is kind of a funny thing because it changes very fast all the time, and it goes through many iterations. And I think it's something that we've been struggling with for a long time. And yet, I don't know, Lisa, what do you think has become more acute in the time of COVID?
Definitely, because it was there as an issue beforehand, and I think we're going to talk about more like how it's been. We're going to talk about more how it's been an issue in general, because it's going to continue even as, God willing, life returns to normal, or whatever the new normal will be. But people consumed it much more, and new people got on. So I think that's why we're thinking of social media more during this time of COVID. And I know that we want to discuss, our sense of self in relation to social media. Does it affect our sense of self? If so, how? And I know our sense of self can be affected by many different things. Social media in general, our communities that we're part of, and so there's lots to discuss.
I think one thing that just also reminds people that we have the chat open. We can see, and Lisa and I both really love hearing what's on people's minds. I know that some people come to something and they're like, I really hope they answer my question. So if it seems like we're not, go ahead and drop it in the chat so we can make sure to circle around, because I'm sure it's relevant and just not something we got to yet. I think one thing that I've been hearing throughout the day today, and Lisa and I have spoken about this at length, was the notion that some people really felt like they thrived in COVID. Maybe not thrived is the right word per se, but that they were able to weather the challenges in a way that made them feel like it was easier to find the silver linings of COVID, and that other people really felt like it was harder for them to find the silver linings of COVID. Particularly for people who maybe didn't have a loss in their own acute world and life in a very specific way. And so I think that that's an important caveat to put in place. But I think that in terms of like people's day-to-day experience, whether it was working from home, whether it was childcare from home, whether it was different dating experiences, relationships, whatever it was, that people really, some people felt like they were faring kind of better than they anticipated, and some people felt like they were really struggling. And we were thinking about the ways in which social media highlighted that, and how people were able to take in social media in light of how they were experiencing the world themselves at that moment in time.
Well, let me ask you something, because people talk about the dangers of social media and whether it affects your especially with teenagers, whether it affects your image of yourself and your confidence. Why does it affect some people negatively and other people it doesn't? As a therapist, why is it I can go onto Instagram, laugh at it, think it's totally fine, and other people, like, their whole self-esteem is suddenly plummets by being on social media?
Totally. One of the things that just happened actually about a week ago, my husband just sent me, Dove had done this campaign about 15 years ago. It was like a real body campaign, and they decided that they were going to redo their campaign. He sent it to me maybe actually less than a week ago, just a couple of days ago. Anyways, I was looking at their new campaign, and it's all about the way in which people are distorting their selfies, and kind of basically cropping them, right? It's a different Dove campaign about cropping. And they took the campaign one step further. They actually have something where you can download a toolkit for parents and for kids about how to manage social media, and how to build confidence. But one piece inside the toolkit struck me, and that was the way in which you consume social media. In other words, are you just scrolling and passively taking in, or are you positively engaging? Are you taking selfies, or are you taking pictures with friends, or taking pictures doing something?
And which is good and which is bad? I'm not even sure.
So it seemed, from a research perspective, that scrolling seemed to be more negative in terms of just like, I'm anxious, I'm bored, I'm doing it to pass the time. I'm looking through and taking in everybody else's world and everything that everybody else is doing, but that I'm not doing, in a very intense negative way, especially when people are already feeling in a place that is hard for them. They're feeling more down on themselves in that moment. So that all the outside influence kind of looking in is already confirming their own sense of reality. Is that confirming variable, right? I know that I'm struggling, so I see everybody else doing amazing. And so this is confirming to me that I'm doing really not a great job. By comparison, if we're contributing in some capacity to the social media world, then that in some way makes us feel like we're a more competent contributing member of society. And it does definitely make a difference.
It's interesting. I hear you. Who am I to disagree with research? But from someone who I have put myself as a Yoetzet on social media, and I will tell you that there, in a weird way, sometimes putting yourself on can make me a little more insecure than just when I'm scrolling. Just me personally, because you put yourself out there. You're waiting for feedback sometimes, but when you're, I don't know. But it's interesting. The research shows elsewhere otherwise.
Well,
but
Lisa, do you think it has to do with the fact that maybe there's a difference between the way that in which adults consume media versus the way in which children consume media? And I think that that's an important variable. One thing that I think we struggle with is that we assume that the way that our kids take in social media is the way that in which we adults take in social media. And so sometimes we leap to assumptions about what we need to do to protect them based on our experience of them, but sometimes they're experiencing it extremely differently than we are.
So you think kids scrolling might have a more dangerous impact, or could? Yeah. Well, they're also, and this is another question I wanted to ask your opinion on, and I think is related, is that I was going to say kids are consuming it at a more insecure place, right? What teenager or what preteen doesn't have insecurities? But one thing I was curious about is that even women in our age category, and don't worry, I know that Dr. Sarah here is much younger than myself, but that's okay. I'm gonna, for the purpose of this talk, I'll call us the same age category.
We're all in it together.
Fine, we're all in it together. We're not kids anymore, at least that.
That's all that matters.
So why, it's funny because, when I think of my parents' generation, I think of like the Loehmann's dressing room, and like women who were like comfortable like getting naked in front of each other, and they didn't even look good. And yet suddenly our generation is like staying almost like teenagers, in the sense that we're not as bad, but like there's still some sense of insecurity, and what what's going on, kind of. Is that because we're still in these, what are some of the factors that you think contribute to that?
When you said off the bat that maybe it's more dangerous for our kids because they're in a more vulnerable place, the first thing that kind of popped in my head was maybe. We naturally think that teenagers, appropriately so, and from a developmental standpoint, middle school kids, teenagers, they should be in a much more vulnerable place. They're still trying to figure out who I am, what my identity is. Interestingly enough, and this is not our topic for tonight, I think that they're more vulnerable in other areas. But I think that it's possible that as people have transitioned into adulthood, they're not as confident as they should be. And some of it might have to do, I think there's a myriad of reasons. And I think a lot of it also has to do with the ways in which we build ourselves and we build our identities in terms of who we are as people. I think oftentimes that we are pausing in a way that we weren't before to ask ourselves, is what I'm doing meaningful? When we talked about this, I like this phrase, when I look in the mirror, I see how I feel, not how I look. And so if we reach a point in time of our life where we look in the mirror and we feel like we're just not filled with meaning and purpose and drive, the things that we talk about with our children in terms of building core values, having a sense of purpose, feeling like we're giving back to the world, feeling like our day has a meaning to it. So when those things are empty, that's when we're vulnerable to eating disorder, disordered eating, and all the sequelae that come with that in terms of body image and so low self-esteem. And I don't think that adults are any different. And so I think that in some ways, the notion of adults trying to perfect their bodies as if they are these women who never had children and never went through the challenges of life, which we know they had. In some ways, it is a capacity to reinvent themselves. But I think, sadly, it's not necessarily feeling the way that they thought that it would. And again, I'm not saying, which I think is an important piece, that people shouldn't care about how they look, right? Because we all care about how we look. The question is it the sum total of who we are? And is it all consuming of our day and our life?
I'm gonna, you said a lot there. So I'm gonna unpack it a little bit. I think, first of all, you said that we assume teenagers are more insecure than adults, but we do have adults who are insecure, and some of it is because we sort of have this crisis of identity that some people, by the way, this also, what you said really ties in the first question we asked. Why are some people immune to the woes of social media and other people are not? Well, if some people are still figuring out their identity, unsure of themselves, then it's going to lead to more insecurity. It's going to lead to a possibly disordered body image or eating, possibly unhealthy consumption of social media. But and women at this stage of life, in their 30s or what, especially during the raising children years, are prone to these crises of identity. Number one, because if you mentioned that the world expects more, we're asking that question: are we leading a meaningful life? What is the purpose of my life, or how is it meaningful? But also, as you implied with the food, we're in the years where our life is constantly being thrown out of whirl. We sort of start out maybe on a career path, or maybe looking a certain way, and suddenly, we create a family, and maybe our career is shattered. Maybe our body feels shattered. It can be very disorienting if you had a certain vision of yourself and suddenly you don't look like yourself anymore.
I think I think it's true, and I think it's especially true and challenging for people, particularly as they raise children. But I think one of the things that's so critical and important, and I think this is like a piece that's, I think, really at the challenging core. You know, mothers are women, right? So, and women who want to be right, where we kind of play these dual roles, and so it becomes very hard and challenging when at the same time that we are dealing with our own myriad of issues, whether it's an identity issue, whether whatever it is that's going on, at the same time, we also have to remind ourselves that we're role modeling to our children about the ways in which we want them to engage with themselves, how we want them to build their identity, and the way in which we want them to have a positive relationship with their body and the world around them. And so I just kind of am putting it out there that I think that that is such a big challenge, and it's something that I hear parents struggling with tremendously, where they kind of feel like I'm trying to send a really positive message to my kids, but I'm struggling. And whether it is that they're struggling and they can't exactly understand or articulate what it is beyond their body image that they're struggling with, but just that they're struggling with their body image in that moment, even though it is something deeper, right? Our body is a way in which we communicate to ourselves and the world around us, that we're having a hard time. But I think that that alone is a challenge, trying to always remember that, like, we're toggling these two roles and they're so intricately related. And sometimes you want them to be separate because you're going to have your own challenges, and you're entitled to have your own challenges. But at the same time, how do we buffer that for our kids and people around us?
Right. Right. Yeah, it definitely is hard. I know something that you and I spoke about is how women whose, especially in terms of their bodies, whose bodies are going through changes, they have an opportunity to role model for their children who are one day going to go through puberty. And their own bodies are going to go through these changes in terms of, you know, that of course we all have our moments where we're uncomfortable, but how we learn to accept and be happy with our bodies and appreciate the strength that they have, etc., is a great role model opportunity for our children, but also a great challenge. You know, women. I know that myself. I sometimes balance if I don't. You know, if my daughter just baked her chocolate chip sticks and like that's the last thing I feel I need right now, and I'm not even craving, and she's like, "Mommy, have one." You know, okay, I'm gonna maybe take a bite and smile because I want to show that's okay and I'm okay with it. And sometimes I also show her, you know, I really don't. I'm gonna try it later, but like when I'm hungry, but I'm really not in the mood now. But it looks great. You did a great job, and that's also okay.
You know, I think that one of the things that I'm constantly thinking about, Lisa, you could speak to this much more from a Torah perspective, is like the way in which we use our words, right? I think sometimes we're in a constant balancing act between the ways in which our body communicates how we feel, but also the ways in which our words communicate how we feel, and never missing an opportunity to try and use our words with our kids to articulate what's happening. It actually is such a powerful tool. Oftentimes parents will come into my office, we'll process something together, and I'll say to them, okay, now take that back. Go back to your kid and say, I thought about what happened yesterday. I just wanted to tell you I was thinking about it and I kind of didn't respond the way I wanted to. And here's my response. First of all, it's so powerful and meaningful because the kid feels like you thought about it. Something impacted them and you thought about it carefully and you came back. And we're also really showing our children that we can always come back to something, not in a perseverative way, not like I need to come back to it 5 times, but like I thought about it, impacted me, and I didn't answer it the way I wanted to answer it. And I think being authentic with our kids is such a critical component in this story, right? So like your analogy of like, you know what, I just had lunch. I'm not so hungry right now. This looks amazing. I'm so happy that you took the initiative and like got this done and like really, you know, it was such hard work. I'm going to save it over here and have it after I have dinner. And I think that's just as powerful of a message as having it right in that moment when you visibly look like you're whatever it is. Maybe you're not hungry for it. Maybe you don't want it. Maybe it's whatever it is. I think being able to communicate that to our kids in a really healthy, positive way is so much more important.
Yeah. And maybe even sometimes you can, like you're saying, share a conflict with them. It's funny you asked me about the Torah perspective. I'm not going to quote. I don't know if I have a Torah quote for this issue, but I know that it doesn't only it's not only with women and girls, and it's not only about food, because it's sometimes, I had to think about it the other day, where one of my children was running out of the house with a dress code issue. We'll put it that way. And I was like, what are you doing? Like, my reaction was to be very unhappy. And I didn't know, of course, the panic of a parent sometimes to want to even control it. I actually threatened to like tell the principal. And then I was like, then they walked out of the house and I was like, what did I just do? I messed this up. I messed it up. So you know what? The next day I said, I don't like the way I handled that. And, you know, I do have there are certain things that are important to me and Abba, and there's certain but I think the point is we are human, and we can, like you're saying, sometimes that communication is the most powerful thing, that that it's okay to not be perfect. Because isn't that what this whole issue is about? This drive that we all feel we need to be perfect, and showing our kids that no, we have the same issue, but we're not perfect.
I love that so much. And I think it's even really applicable to the way in which we engage in social media. I know that one of the things that, you know, if we're just thinking about in terms of parenting, you know, there's so many ways to look at this topic. You could look at it in terms of our own adult consumption of it, but we can also look at it in terms of how we monitor our teenagers and our children's consumption of social media. And I think that one of the things that's so critical as important is we're not always going to be, you know, there's obviously many schools of thought, but there is a school of thought, right? We shut down all technology. We kind of shield our children from any ways in which they take in the world that's different from our hashkafot, from our values. And in this way, we will kind of keep everything very tamped down. And it's definitely a philosophy. And I haven't lived it or practiced it, so I'm not in a place to judge it. It's just a different methodology. But I think that if we are going to be people who allow our children to engage and consume social media for a whole variety of parenting reasons and decisions that parents get to make those decisions about, I think one of the critical things we want to be doing is at least talking to our children in real time about how they're consuming it. And when they scroll through that social media, the same way we encourage parents to sit down with your kids, not all the time, but every now and then, watch the TV show that they're watching, ask them questions about how they're consuming it. They might surprise you. They might say to you, yeah, we know this isn't real life. My kids recently just said that to me. You know, like, this is just like, it's a TV show. It's their world. It's not our world. But really taking a pause and asking our kids, like, when you scroll down and you see that, what does it mean to you? Like, how do you understand it? How do you experience it? Why does somebody take a selfie? What does it mean to put on filters? And kind of putting it out there as an opportunity for kids to think about it. I think if they blow it off, don't hammer it, right? Kind of take their cue, right? And be like, okay, that's not something that's even kind of in their brain. It's not resonating with them. But I think they know that it's out there. You put it out there and you'll be able to come back to it and have a more thoughtful conversation about it. And I think that is the most critical job as parents of children who are consuming social media in terms of building self-esteem and building self-worth.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's very good advice. I like, I like the idea of just today, unfortunately, I was at an unveiling, and the one child was talking about her mother as she had gotten older and saying they used to watch Jeopardy together. You'd be surprised that if our kids are going to consume something, at least bringing ourselves into it in those conversations, I think that's great. But I want to bring us back for a minute, Sarah, to our generation, the women themselves, and the issue again of self-image and confidence. And I want to talk a little bit about how to strengthen ourselves in that. I was thinking about in the Torah, because I think sometimes we get this whole selfie thing. The title of our talk, Selfies and Self-Image, right? So selfies like focuses us on this external image, right? And how we look in our bodies. But as you said, when you look in the mirror, you're really seeing not just your physique, but what's going on inside. And I was thinking a little bit about beauty in the Torah, because there are many times when a lot of our imahot and a lot of the female characters are described as beautiful, and it can make a person feel like, whoa, is this what the Torah is saying is important? Like, what's going on here? But I believe that all the women who are described as beautiful, it seems to not just be about their physical appearance. It usually is a reflection of some inner beauty, some inner goodness, and it seems to almost shine on the outside. I was thinking of it particularly with Esther, because it always seemed a little like, okay, was this the prettiest woman in all of Persia? But but she was also the one who oh, I don't need the treatment. I don't need in the midrash, like the natural beauty. But I think what the natural beauty doesn't mean, we don't have to take that literally, like, oh, she didn't even need makeup. She didn't even need a filter. She took this, no, we all need filters. No, just kidding. We don't need filters. But, I think what it meant about Esther is there was an inner sense of who she was. And in fact, when does she become the most attractive to Ahasuerus? When is he really losing his mind for Esther? It's after she commits herself to being the one who's going to save the Jewish people. It's like the greater her self-identity was, the more she was mission-driven, suddenly she becomes attractive and irresistible. So, you the other day when we were talking had some really great ideas about what can some women who don't yet have, who are still totally figuring out that self-identity, what can they do to build it up?
So I want to just, Lisa, I love what you said, first of all. I think that it also speaks to the fact that even in Esther, after she was chosen for the most highest position, she was still finding herself. She was still trying out what was going to work for her. And I think that that's a reminder in such a small way for all of us that we are still figuring it out. Every day that, thank God, we're here is an opportunity to live life, an opportunity to feel like we're one step closer to figuring out something in our life that is meaningful, that is more purposeful, that we can do a little bit better at. And I'm something that, I don't know how you framed it, but what I'm thinking about is something that Rabbi Nate Henkin so appropriately said today. She said that if you think you can have more than one priority, you're wrong. She's like, sometimes your priority shifts, and sometimes you have to give your number one priority to somebody else. You need a good partner to be able to say, I need you to take care of this while I'm taking care of that, to be able to share those responsibilities. But I think the piece of being kind to ourselves, to recognize both how much we have inside of us that we can accomplish and we can do, but also to be kind to ourselves. If we actually audibly listened or put all of our negative thoughts of ourselves into somebody else and had them read back to us, we would so quickly be like, "Oh, you are being so hard on yourself. Like, be kinder." but we don't naturally do it to ourselves. And so I think that taking a step back to remind ourselves that we have to be very kind to ourselves, and also in a very profound way to let go of some of the guilt. We do one thing, it means that we kind of let go of something else. And to look around and say that somebody else's perfection is not my perfection, right? We look at something and we say, they're doing it so amazing. But the reality is, first of all, we never know what goes on in somebody else's home. And second of all, different people have different strengths. Something that works well for them or as part of their genetic makeup doesn't necessarily work well for somebody else. And really being able to, what I refer to as, set yourself up for success. So, if you're not, I love baking and I love baking with kids, but some people hate baking and they really hate baking with their kids. And so if that's not a good way for you to connect with your kids because you end up screaming and yelling and your kitchen feels like a chaotic mess, I'm using that as a very cliche example. That's not something to be your first thing out of the gate that's going to make you feel like a more capable parent, and really looking for opportunities. But I think in terms of moms who have
it's funny because on Instagram last week, someone I follow, who's the confident Kala teacher, I think. She's amazing. Her posts, if you're listening, guys, that's a good consumption. Okay. But she wrote something like, "Help, I don't actually like baking challah with my kids." And she looking for suggestions. And similar to what you're saying, okay, so maybe give it up. I said to her, well, maybe and here is someone who she's a professional. She must have so much to offer, but there's this pressure that we have to have everything, and I said maybe just do it once, every 6 months. So it's something, I'm going to devote this time, but it doesn't have to be a pressure every week. Anyway, I'll have to ask her what she decided, but I think that's something that, for if you're working and maybe, you're not going to be the one to be the homework master or to have the most organized home on the block, and it's okay. And if you're home, maybe putting in your passion and your creativity into something about your home life or about your community service, or I think you're right. Picking your priority is interesting.
And I think that, again, we kind of come on thinking, I'm looking at the title because it's in my banner, the social media, selfies, and self-esteem. And I think that, one could have thought we were going to get on and kind of how do you rah around your body and how do you have all this self-acceptance of your body? And what we did is we really went in a different direction. And we talked about the fact that self-esteem and the way in which we consume social media, the lens through which we take in social media, actually has so much more to do with how we're feeling about ourselves as human beings. And it's the same with our children. In order for our children to have a healthy relationship with their bodies, with their sense of identity, with their sense of self-confidence, we have to have a healthy relationship with our sense of self and our sense of identity. And so I do think, though, there is also, in addition to that, this moment of radical acceptance, right? This I hate making challah, whatever. I'm using that as a very random thing. Or somebody said to me recently, I hate podcasts. That is not how I want to learn information. And I happen to love podcasts, so I'm totally guilty, but I must have said it to a friend of mine. And she's like, I hate podcasts. So I think there's a moment of radical acceptance. There's something to try things out and say, what are areas in my life that I feel like I would like to feel like my own person, right? And I think that is such an important piece. I do think that there is a real struggle in our world today around the fact that so much of our identities are built around motherhood. And in fact, some of the other topics that people are talking about is, aside from some of the very intense challenges of fertility, some of that very much has to do with feeling a lack of the motherhood identity and a deep craving to be part of that connectivity. And that is its own talk. But I think it speaks to this piece of the fact that we've built an identity, particularly in the religious Jewish world, around motherhood. And it's powerful and it's real and it's wonderful. But it also sometimes leaves women at moments and times in their lives feeling a little bit more empty than they anticipated that they would feel, and not knowing how to crawl their way out of it when they've dropped off their kids from school. And sometimes they've even picked careers that wasn't necessarily their passion, but was something that would work with the lifestyle that they wanted. And so I think that really taking a pause to think about the ways in which we can be, no matter how old we are, no matter how many kids we have, as long as we're working together with the partner in our home to make sure that it works, the ways in which we fulfill ourselves as people, whether it's volunteering, whether it's self-caring, whether it's education, whether that's education in a field that we're interested in, whether it's Torah education, asking ourselves, like, we're never too it's one of our partnering institutions is Lamdenu. I'll just use that as an example because I'm a big fan of them. It's all adult education, and I'm always inspired by the fact that the average age is, I would say, probably people in their 60s who are retired and they're coming to learn, and reminding ourselves that if we want to feel like people who are contributing to the world in myriad of ways, we also have to be part of that change and part of that challenge. And in that way, we start to feel better about ourselves, finding causes that we're passionate about.
Hey, anyone who wants more Torah, just come knocking at the door.
Exactly. But I think it's so true. I really, Lisa,
Right.
I think that, if you're a person who naturally, searches it out, it's amazing. But I think sometimes people don't even realize what they're missing. They just know they're not happy. They know that they're looking and they're like, that person has it together and that person has it together. And maybe if I do this in my home, then I will feel better, even though they don't like that. And that's why I go back to that radical acceptance of what works for you and what doesn't work for you, and finding things that are important to you. And it's okay to have something that's important to you that's separate from your husband and separate from your children.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know what? Sometimes it's something that you are going back to that you had earlier, and sometimes it can be a new passion. But you know what's funny? You mentioned that, okay, we could have taken this talk more in the direction of body image. And instead, we really, I think we spoke about consuming social media and doing so, and how we do so healthily as adults and maybe as parents, and modeling or going into it with our kids, watching what they're doing. And we spoke about our own self-identity being more than just the way we look. But now I do want to ask you about confronting, women confronting their bodies as they change. It's something I've been thinking about because I think of it as a good thing, but I think it definitely is challenging for some women. Nida and mikvah kind of forces you to confront it a lot. Especially I often talk to women right after giving birth. They call me about going back to the mikvah. That's they're often like, I don't even know where to start, anyway. And many of them have expressed they can't imagine going back to intimacy. They can't imagine having sex again. They can't imagine feeling sexy after what they've gone through. But I don't know if you would consider it better or worse, but the mikvah kind of, having to plan to go to the mikvah kind of forces you to get back in the game, I guess, right? You have to, one of the mitzvot of going to mikvah is iyun. You have to look over your body. You have to be seen in front of a mikvah attendant, not during a COVID year, but okay, before that. And then you're going to be seen by your husband, and you're resuming this. So I think people have mixed feelings, whether that's a positive that mikvah brings, or it's too much to confront. But do you ever counsel women in who just feel how I've changed so much. How am I going to feel good about it again? How am I going to feel sexy again?
It's a little, Lisa and I did not plan this part out, actually. So I wanted to say this, but it happens to be happens to be that I taught a course many years ago in Ramaz about body image and self-esteem, and I also taught a mikveh course. And one of the things I pointed out is the fact that you're also alone in a prep room. You're by yourself. You're completely alone, and you have to confront yourself, your body in the mirror with your own quiet voice, and have to be able to sustain that. And I think that it's in those moments that we really want to try to remind ourselves a couple of things. First of all, we are kind. We are kind to ourselves. This moment of like, we're asking a lot of ourselves. We're asking a lot of our bodies. And we're putting onto other people expectations that maybe they don't have of us, but that we have of ourselves. And I think that that's such an important thing. Although I do think, again, somebody else who has an expertise in relationships, though I do some of it, could probably tell you that, again, that biggest moment of communication is being able to look at your husband and say, I just want to tell you, this is really stressful for me. Like, this is hard. Like, I didn't anticipate looking like this postpartum and having to re-engage. And then being open and being willing to trust when that person says, I think you look beautiful, and being able to hear it and remember that they see so many parts of ourselves that we actually are so critical of. And so I'm not saying that we should be so disconnected to think that our 6-week postpartum mikvah body is the same body that we got married with, but we just gave birth to a child. We brought life into this world, and to really reward ourselves for the things in which our body is capable of doing. And I think that that is such a powerful piece that we oftentimes don't do, reminding ourselves that we're not supposed to look the way we did when we got married, because we have so many other responsibilities and so many other values, and we've brought life, please God, into this world many times over. And I think trying to remind ourselves that we as people have shifted and changed, and our relationship has shifted and changed, and hopefully we, the people we are, regardless of whether or not our body is exactly the same, are much better people today than we were a week ago, a month ago, a year ago. And I think oftentimes that's what people's challenges are also. They don't always feel like they're doing so much better.
I'm thinking about, we spoke about when Sarah and I were preparing, we spoke about messaging to our kids, and that people tend to right away say to kids, this was Sarah's observation more, oh, you're so cute. Oh my God, that's the cutest kid. Okay. But we know, we first talk about their looks, and how wouldn't it be great if, and parents do this sometimes, but wouldn't it be great if everyone in the world would notice, like, wow, your child just picked up such an interesting toy. They're so observant to notice the best toys, or they have look how they're babbling, or like just pointing out all the other and praising the children for all the other amazing, miraculous things that children do. But I was also thinking, it's not just steering away from beauty, but it's also broadening beauty.
Yeah.
Because as like wouldn't it be great if even in our own minds, our beauty was not connected to just the way our body looks, but our beauty was, you have a sparkle in your eye when you smile, or you have, like, where there are things about our physical appearance even that we just appreciate, we love, and it doesn't all have to be connected to the weight when we were 17.
Yeah. Lisa Bloom was the one who really kind of coined it, and I read it from her in the Huffington Post article. She wrote a book called Think, Straight Talk for Women to Stay Smart in a Dumbed Down World. And she talks about all the ways in which we automatically, she really referenced it in terms of children, like you mentioned, this notion of we look at kids and say, oh my goodness, you're so cute. And what would it be like to look at a child and say, oh, why don't you tell me what book you're reading? I tried it a few times. It felt so unnatural, even though this is like my own Halacha, it's my own work, but I kind of had this moment. I was like, oh my goodness, it feels a little bit unnatural. So I think that I try to take away from it more than anything else the kernel of how are we talking to people in general, right? How are we engaging people? Because I think that, again, something I mentioned at the beginning is we don't want to be so countercultural that nobody can relate to the notion that, like, it doesn't matter what you look like, and trying to also kind of send that message to our kids because they're not apt to hear it, because we will just seem so out of touch with reality and out of touch with the world. And in reality, me saying it to all the adults is also very tone deaf. That's not what people are experiencing, and that's not what people are feeling. And so I think that it's a balancing act, though, being able to say that and also being able to engage with people in meaningful conversations. And I'm kind of thinking to ourselves, how many times do I sit around with somebody and kind of engage in conversations that perhaps don't make me, are either things that I'm not actually interested in, but are things that are very easy to gravitate towards and to talk about. And sometimes we'll be surprised. We'll be surprised at the way in which we can elevate conversation and how interested people will be in things that we read and things that we talked about and things that we heard from somebody else that actually make us walk away from a conversation feeling enriched and feeling much more of like a person. And in that way, I'm going to hazard a guess that we're going to walk away from that experience feeling like a stronger person instead of having a conversation that doesn't necessarily, that feels somewhat superficial, which we all do, because it's just like, it's like kind of like that kiddish conversation. But if I had to hazard a guess, I would say that in those kiddish conversation moments, people feel a lot more self-conscious than they would than if they met a friend for coffee and we're really having a deep, meaningful conversation. Again, we live in a world where we're going to be having those conversations.
It's easier said than done, for sure. Right. But I love what you're saying. And look, you know, one gift of COVID is I finally, for the first time in my life, joined a book club this year.
See, there you go.
Like, it's so nice. Like, you know, it's nice to take women who, you're right, like at a kiddish, we would talk about the most superficial things. We just would. Not bad superficial, no. just whatever. And here we talk about these interesting books, and it leads to conversations about life, and it's really it really is, it's beautiful. And you know, it reminds me of a Mishnah. I just celebrated, my daughter had her bat mitzvah, and we were learning Pirkei Avot together, and again, not only do conversations sometimes get a little superficial, but you know, we can turn towards gossip and all that, and again, even, you know, even social media, by the way, can be meaningful things we engage in, and it can be very like the opposite. And the Mishnah that I was learning with my daughter was Kinat ta'ava v'kavod motzi'ina ta'adam min ha'olam. Jealousy and lust and glory remove a person from this world. And it was, you know, kind of like, what does it mean, remove a person from this world? What is, like, is that just a way of saying they're really, really bad, you're going to be killed if you do them? And, you know, one explanation we discussed was it removes you from your world, the real world, which is the beauty that's inside and the values and the things you care about. How so? Because kin'ah and ta'ava, they're focusing on tying everything, you know, social media and body image. It's focusing on what you don't have, what others have, what you're seeing on that selfie. And when you're focused on that jealousy and that selfie and what others have, you're missing the opportunity to like really, you know, really be in the moment. Really be in the moment. So
I think it's really true. And I think that one of the things, it's an interesting way to think about it. We're not all going to be experiencing moments of meaning every moment in our lives. I think that is like a very unreal kind of that moment of kind of like that sourdough starter moment. Everyone's not making sourdough. You don't need to necessarily start making sourdough.
right.
That's a very tall order. But I think what actually ends up happening is that there are multiple buckets that we kind of have proverbially in our body. And as we fill up one, then it kind of counterbalances those other moments, so that when we see something that naturally maybe would make us feel a little bit insecure, we're able to take a step back. And I think this is the piece that COVID kind of highlighted around the social media, where people were feeling a heightened sense of insecurity around their identity. And so everything that they saw, people who were feeling a more heightened sense of insecurity around who they were as a person, very much were able to take in other people kind of thriving in a very intensely anxiety-provoking, sad way, because it really highlighted how empty they were feeling in their own sense of self and their own sense of identity. And so I don't think it's that every moment has to be 100% fulfilling and meaningful, and there can never be that moment of like, oh, where did you buy that from? Or, what did you make last night? Right? But I think what ends up happening is that we end up feeling as people more confident because that bucket is fuller, because we're doing things in our life. And sometimes there are some people who have to really do those things in a very concrete way. Some people naturally gravitate towards finding those things. And some people really have to put themselves out there to do them, to find ways and things that feel meaningful to them. Again, in their bandwidth, right? Don't pick something that you really don't enjoy, but finding things to volunteer, things to get invested in, things to learn, things to, a new career that maybe you want to get started off, whatever it is, but finding things in your life that feel meaningful, that enhance how you feel about yourself and your sense of identity and sense of self-worth, that fills that bucket up, so that when you're kind of scrolling through that Instagram world and you're noticing all the people who manage to set their tables a certain way or get that sourdough starter going, whatever it is, that is not, it's okay that wasn't your thing for COVID or for any other time, that you have other things that you feel really, really good about.
Or just that you were able, and even if you don't, just that you were able to manage like a really hard, like everyone's, some kids are easier, some kids are harder, some jobs are easier, sometimes right. Just getting by is going to be more challenging in some families. That's and that right. is a big accomplishment. By the way, I want to pause because I know that Sarah and I are going to be ending in a minute, but if there are any questions before we do, feel free to put them in the chat.
We have somebody moderating our chat. Thank you, Dina Block, who's behind the scenes moderating our chat. She's our host for this evening. Thank you. Big shout out to her. She's been doing this for a couple of hours.
Oh, gosh.
We appreciate that. So any questions in the chat? But yeah, I think that as we're waiting for any of those questions to come on through, I think that really, the notion I just want to take away, again, thinking about those notions of kind of being kind to ourselves, being kind to our children, being honest with our children, being honest with ourselves. And I also just think one of the things that's actually okay to say to kids is to say, when a kid comes home, and I think this is particularly challenging for parents, I'm kind of dropping like a little bit of a bomb in as we're about to kind of sign off here. But I think one of the things that I notice parents say is, I'm having such a hard time with my own sense of body. And then my kid walks in the door and says like, oh my God, I hate the way I look. And all that's going through our head is, I also hate the way I look. How am I supposed to help her in this moment? This is going to be a train wreck. And I think, again, going back to this notion, you don't have to have all the answers. It's okay to look at your kid and just be like, I just want to let you know that I think that you are beautiful inside and out, but I totally appreciate that you're not feeling good about the way you look. Do you want to tell me what happened in your day? Because we're going to take the principle that we're acknowledging how they feel. We're acknowledging that sometimes we feel that way in our body, but the way that we communicate our body is actually not necessarily only about our body, but the way that we're experiencing our sense of identity. And so validating for our kid that it was that that's how they feel, that it's real. And then also maybe just kind of probing to see what the rest of their day was like, because 9 times out of 10, they'll say to you, I mean, it was a fine day. I don't even know why you're asking me that. I mean, like, except for the fact that this guy tripped over my bag and this person dumped this on me and that person gave me a hard time. And then now you're in it on a deep, meaningful conversation about what happened in their school day. And less about the fact that they feel like their shirt wasn't fitting them right. Not that their shirt wasn't fitting them right, but it actually is not about their shirt. Going back to those kind of main principles. We look in the mirror and see how we feel, not what we are. And so that's what your kid's telling you when they walk in the door. Not always, but 9 times out of 10.
Right. You know, I just to kind of wrap up, I think we talked a lot here about social media, our consumption, our kids' consumption. You connected from the very beginning. You said, when you are not just a consumer of it, but a contributor, it's likely to make you feel more positive. And I think your big message to parents was like, what is going to make you feel like a contributor? Everyone's going to find that thing. If we don't, many of us already have it and know it. If we don't find it, because that's going to help us in everything else, in our consumption of social media, in our body image, in our envy, in so many of the other areas. And finally, since it is a process and a lifelong one, when our kids are going through it and we haven't figured it all out, that's okay. And that just like reminds me, because this weekend, you know, hearing the news of what happened on Thursday, I think it's like you process it on so many levels, the tragedy, but also as a parent. And like, I don't know if it was Rabbi Shlomo Katz, or I heard so many inspiring things, but someone once said, this isn't a time for answers. And it's okay to admit that. And it's okay that if your kid asks you a question, like, I don't know, I wonder that also. And I think that's okay, even with, not just with a tragedy, but even on the small things, like, shoot, I don't feel great about myself. I don't always feel 100% great about myself either. It's a process, like, and you know, but hopefully we have a few tools, and thank you, Sarah, for giving us some practical tools for how to move forward in that process.
I just want to say one last thing, Lisa, just because you reminded me of it. Something that oftentimes, you know, I talk when I'm working with clients with anorexia and bulimia who are truly, and binge eating, so truly torturing themselves over an extra cookie, some food item that they genuinely love. And they are talking about with such pain and distress the idea of consuming this food and what will happen, what will it do to their body, and how awful they will feel. And we often pause and think to ourselves, kind of, I reflect back to them, do you feel good right now? And they kind of say, well, no, I don't feel good right now either. And really asking ourselves good questions about, like, is it worth it? And those are, you know, again, those are kind of, I'm giving you a snapshot in like much more kind of like, you know, kind of hard treatment.
Right.
Is it worth it? And so sometimes really thinking about this also, you know, the tragedy may run, and thinking about these parents and kind of taking a pause and reminding ourselves that, is it worth the 5 pounds, right? For that moment to sit with our child when we're thinking, if you're sitting at the Shabbos table and you're thinking to yourself, I'm going to pass on dessert. What message am I sending to my children about the importance of my body versus the importance of being present at this table and showing a sense of confidence, a sense of being able to enjoy, and really taking a moment to ask ourselves, like, what's the long term? And I think we'll often come out on the side of being a positive, present parent that's showing our children how to enjoy food, meals, Shabbos, Yantiv, whatever it is. And I'm not minimizing the challenge, but I am emphasizing the critical importance of something that is so physical, but in reality, so much bigger and so much more spiritual.
Well, pardon the pun, but that's a weighty issue to end on. Okay.
Exactly. Thank you, Lisa.
Yes.
This was amazing. So much fun.
Thank you very much.
Okay, have a great night,
Okay.
everybody.
Good night.